Here at the Mere Mortals, we know a thing or two about ego. Welcome back, Mere Mortalites, to another edition of Mere Mortals Book Reviews. Today I've got Ego is the Enemy, the second book from Ryan Holiday that I have been reading as of late. If you might have checked out the previous, The Obstacle is the Way. I'm in a Ryan Holiday reading spree, so this is the second one, Ego is the Enemy. And I'm going to go through as much as I can differentiate this book from some of the other ones, because as you'll see, there are some very close similarities when you're reading someone. Again, a very similar book, a theme of learning and encouragement and the like. So we'll get stuck into it. But a bit of a synopsis of the book. Now, I will hold this up to the camera, and if you are not seeing this, if you're listening to the audio and you're not seeing the video, you might tell, this book's a little bit crumpled. That's because I dropped it in the bath, so it's a little bit, it appears to be thicker, but in fact, there's just over 200 pages, so it's not a giant chunk of book. And again, I was able to complete this one along with the other book from Ryan Holiday in a little bit over a month, so it was quite easily digestible. And the way that the book, Ego is the Enemy, is structured, now I'll get into what it is again, but in a similar Ryan Holiday style, it's got a little bit of an introductory piece, a little bit of a closing piece, and goes into more of a personal understanding of Ryan Holiday and why he thought talking about the ego was going to be important, but then goes into the meat and potatoes of it, which was big 3 sections. And then Obstacles Away, you might remember from the previous book review, he split up the book into 3 key sections, which then had individual pages that sort of mix between 5 to 10 pages worth of information. In a similar way, Ego is an Enemy is split up into 3, and he talks about it in the way of aspiring. So there's you as an individual, as an entity, aspiring to something, success, and then failure. And again, it is how ego applies in the different perspectives when you're aspiring towards something, where you're successful at something, or where you are failure. So different points in the journey of life within each one of those chapters as well. So again, I'll give you an example here of some of the ones in Aspire. Talk, to be or to do, become a student, restrain yourself, get out of your own head. Now, these are, again, quite short and brief, 5-6 pages. And once again, in a similar way that The Obstacle is the Way actually undertook it, begins with a quote, then goes into a story, generally with something that's quite recognizable or a name that's recognizable. One piece I guess I picked up about Ego as an Enemy in comparison to Obstacle is the Way is that while in Obstacle is the Way, there seem to be more apparent or name-ready people who you might at first glance go, oh yes, I do know about them or have heard about them, and I didn't hear or understand that deeper story. Ego as the Enemy is using perhaps some individuals who you might not know, or at least for me, it seemed to be much more US specific. So just keep a note on that as well. But then in similar aspirations as the previous book from Ryan, it goes into that initial story around why that particular topic, how it applies to a real life example. It then will talk into how it was positive or negative. So there are aspects here, unlike the previous book, where the reference to the story will actually be how it went wrong, not just where it was applied and it went right. So that was a good little mixture as well. And again, then talks into the majority of the piece of why that aspect of that key idea is so important. The big theme, moving into the themes of the actual book as well. So from Ego is the Enemy, well, it's probably pretty apparent that ego is an enemy and something that you should try to vanquish, try to remove from your journey, whether it's whether you're aspiring or successful or failing, or all of them at the same time, perhaps. And in just over 200 words, Brian does do a good job of highlighting examples of what ego is in, but I think the key place where he actually was able to put this together and make it highlight it quite specifically is that, unlike in the previous book, once again, in this one, at the very beginning and the very end, he does put a quite personal spin to the book. So he actually does talk about his time at American Apparel and some of the dangers that ego applied there. And it sort of highlighted, almost brought it together, what the book in general was trying to task forward, because he was able to see firsthand how ego overcame and eventually really bankrupt a really quite large company in terms of when they were successful, when they were failing, how they acted in that time, and how ego played a massive part. He also was able to reflect, and I guess this is another theme of this book, is there's a lot of more maturity in this book in comparison to the previous book that I read from him of The Obstacle is the Way. I can't pinpoint exactly what that is or why it is. And my best attempt at that would be as you're reading through, and even at the very tail end of the book, you almost see him take a small stance, a small sort of pause around why he's actually writing this book. At the very tail end, you actually get to find out that this book went through, I think it was like 12 iterations or something like that. And it was quite a stressful and hard period to get this book out. And he even challenged himself around the ego of when he was building this book and why he was trying to build particular pages or information, and whether it was for himself or for a grander purpose. So it seem like there was more maturity to the book. And so that's probably another theme that I went through. And of course, probably a third theme I just wanted to call out, which, it's a self-help book in most ways. It's a self-help book that refers to previous quotes, previous stories, previous ideas. Once again, if you are a fan of that, if you enjoy being able to reflect on what somebody else has done and trying to apply it into your own life, fantastic. There's probably even less so than The Obstacle is the Way. It doesn't really go into the ways of how you can really apply it personally to your own life. So I will put that caveat that depends on how you really want to learn through it. He even makes a call out in the book, and I'm probably paraphrasing here, but it's more around the words of, any fool can learn from their own failures, but it's being able to learn from the failures of others that can create bigger wisdom. So, take that as the idea of, if you can learn from other examples, fantastic. And, from my perspective, you should. It's a good thing, rather than doing them yourself and having to go through that failure process yourself. But if you don't, and you're looking for almost a guide me and show me the way, Ego as the Enemy is probably not going to be your favorite for that, or at least don't be seeking it out for that perspective. Finally, just some personal observations and my own feelings around Ego as the Enemy. Now, you might recall, and if you don't, go check out The Obstacle is the Way. I came into it with an expectation that it was going to be fantastic, the previous book. It sort of started off slow, but finished off quite strong. Now, Ego is the Enemy actually went the opposite way. I started off the book, now coming off the back of that Ryan Holiday Obstacle is the Way, and I was really enjoying it. So I'm going to say through all that aspiring section, I was just absolutely plastered to it. I was reading it quite quick. I thought, man, I'm going to finish this even quicker than I was reading Obstacle Goes Away. But then it sort of ranged into success and failure chapters, or the big sort of groupings. And I slowed down quite a bit. And I sort of personally looked at that, and I thought, okay, is it one? And quite likely this could be a possibility. Is it me? Is it, I've now read 2 Ryan Holiday books in a row. Is it just a little bit too much self-help? Am I getting a little bit bored, or a little bit over-informed with a lot of this information that's either, one, really practical, sort of simple, but just not easy to apply? But perhaps there's a part of that. But 2, what I did find is, and unlike The Obstacle in the Way and the sectioning there, in Ego as the Enemy with aspiring, there was aspects of aspiring and the chapters within there that there was a lot of learnings which you'd also apply into success, and you'd also apply into failure. So if I was to go back to those titles that I was just referring to before, when I look into success and when I look into failure, there are standout chapters in there. Like, let's talk about for success, there is managing yourself, but there's also entitlement, control, and paranoia. There's also beware the disease of me. Now, he does do a good job of using different stories to highlight it, but you can almost conglomerate a lot of those ideas into the same thing. There's always so many ways you can actually explain the dangers of ego. And in part, while there could be a million stories and a million different journeys that you can sort of articulate that, it almost found it to me that after reading it for 30 or 40 pages, I kind of got it. I was like, okay, I know what you're trying to say. You're now almost applying it to different storylines, to different journeys. And perhaps, was it because I then had read it and I just went, okay, cool, I'm over it. There's a possibility of that. So just be conscious of the fact that there might be a little more repetition in this book than you would have seen in some of the previous ones, or at least that was my take from Ryan Holiday. So finally, what did I actually think of the book overall? So for me, I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. So in the end, by the tail end of it, I went, okay, I'm done. I'm finished. I'm done reading the Ryan Holiday book. Even to the point that just for myself, I went, okay, the next book I'm going to read is not another Ryan Holiday book. I'm going to just try to space it out, go and pick up another one that I've got on my list, and then pick up a following one, just in case it's going to be an aspect of me just getting, let's just say, over reading a lot of Ryan Holiday all in one go. So just want to make sure that these reviews don't get filtered in that way or viewed in that way just because of little old me. But then again, we are mere mortals. So there's that as well, Mere Mortalites. So yeah, 7.5 out of 10. Would I recommend for you to read it? Absolutely. So right at the very front of this, it has a little piece from Derek Sivers, which he says, reread it each year. It's that important. Now, would I reread it each year? No. I would not say that, Mere Mortalites. I would say read it, though. I think it's a really good book. There's going to be an abundant amount of things here that I might have either learned previously that I went, okay, fine, I've heard this before, but there was a whole host of stuff that I went, wow, this is stuff that I just haven't really considered in a full way. So just to pull out a couple of the quotes that really thought was interesting for me. One was, impressing people is utterly different than being truly impressive. And I think that particular quote, when I wrote it down, was one of those good thinking moments. It was like a good day worth of thinking. Now, that for me was an interesting piece, but for you, perhaps there might have been other pieces in here that you go, okay, this is quite awesome. And look, I'll finish it off with ego as the enemy. Little language piece. I like the definition that they had in here about ego. Ego, it's an unhealthy belief of our own importance. And with that, Mere Mortalites, I'm going to leave it at that. Once again, we are Valley for Valley enabled. So if you do want to support us here at the Mere Mortals podcast, feel free to send through some boostgrams, some comments, some thoughts if you're using any podcasting 2.0 enabled applications. And if you haven't checked it out, look, we talk about it all the time. So do go check it out. And once again, also be tuning into our main Mere Mortals podcast. For now, that's all. One.